welcome to this presentation on eAssessment and Generative AI. I'm going to start off by talking, there's a bit of a picture here actually. This picture is by Anton Grabole, and it comes from a website called Better Images of AI. And that website was set up because a group of people got fed up with all these images of AI which either tend to be science fiction or they're images of humanoid looking robots. And so they said, we're going to do something to change this. And it's an excellent website. Anton says about this picture, he says the cupboard is a metaphor for a classification system or an algorithm, with the drawers representing different categorization classes. The black cupboard, the classification system itself, can be a black box, meaning that the mechanisms by which data is classified into a specific class are often hidden even to the developers of these systems. So there's a few more pictures you'll see from Better Images of AI in this presentation. And of course, this picture here from Rick Payne and his team is saying AI is asking that question. Well, what is generative AI? Generative AI is artificial intelligence capable of generating text, images, or other data using generative models, often in response to prompts. Generative AI models learn the patterns and structure of their input training data and then generate new data that has similar characteristics. Of course, the question is there, and it's in the middle of that picture. Is this actually intelligence or is this machine learning? And I'd say it's not intelligence, but it is machine learning. Okay, well, let's go on to the next question. Why assessment? And I think it's a question we don't often ask ourselves, why we're assessing. When I set out to do this slide, I did a Google search and came up with several sites, quite a lot of sites asking why assessment. But what was interesting is that there is absolutely no consensus as to what the purpose of assessment is. We've got a lot of different ideas of what it might be for, but very little consensus. So I think the first thing when we're talking about e-assessment and generative AI that we have to do is to do some hard thinking about why we are doing the assessment. Of course, assessment is often divided up into three different categories: diagnostic assessment, summative assessment, and formative assessment. Well, let's explore those ideas a little bit further. So we've got summative assessment, which is generally nearest to assessment of learning, with the purpose of demonstrating or documenting achievement in learning. And then we've got the more formative assessments, which is assessment as learning or assessment for learning, which are basically seeking to give feedback on learning and teaching, or in the case of assessment as learning, to self-regulate and critically evaluate. And of course we got assessment of learning, which is what we generally call examinations, yes, which is high stakes. And then formative assessment doesn't sound as hanging up on it. It's a low stake process, but it's worth thinking about what are we trying to achieve with our assessment. And one thing I'd sort of probably argue is that generative AI makes developing assessments much quicker and easier, and so can allow us to move towards more formative assessment, which I think improves and supports learning, rather than assessment of learning, summative assessment, which in general just stresses people out, to be honest. Okay, So along comes generative AI, and what's the reaction of education? Panic, panic, panic. This is the end of assessment as we know it. Everything stops. Ban the generative AI. Ban it. Stop it. And of course, that's nothing new in the reaction of education to various technologies over the ages. That little one in the middle is a slide rule. When I was at school, we used these slide rules. I couldn't use one now. I can't remember how to do it. But we used these slide rules, but we were banned from using them in exams. You might use them in the classroom, but you're not using them in exams. And then, of course, when I went to university, we moved up from slide rules to these electric calculators. Of course, we use our phones now, don't we? But this we had in Swansea University. We had in the geography department, we had to do statistics. And there was a great discussion of whether we should be allowed to use this new electronic device to learn statistics or if it would stop us learning. And now, of course, if we look on the right, we've got generative AI and we've got computers. So, of course, computers, people typing, not learning to write properly. But then, of course, books. I guess all of us use books for learning all the time, probably. But when it comes to exams, ban books. So it's nothing new, and usually what happens in education is after a while we stop trying to ban it, although in the UK they're still trying to ban mobile phones from schools through the law, which is a bit crazy. But we start accepting the technology and calming down a little. So here's what I say, don't panic. You can use generative AI, assessment can continue into the future despite it. Now this diagram from Patrick Craven from City and Guilds in London predates generative AI, but I think it's a very useful diagram because it recognises a whole continuum between automated assessment and human marking, and a continuum between e-testing systems and e-portfolio systems. I'd sort of argue that e-portfolio systems are have a great future, despite the fact they've been around for a long time and haven't been widely adopted always. But look, you've got a difference between the e-testing systems with multiple choice, hotspot, drag and drop, interactive, and these have been around since the late 1990s. And City and Guilds say they deliver these 1.5 million tests a year to 30,000 centres in UK, Africa, Asia and Europe. But then we've got the other end of e-portfolio solutions, which are more in line with explanations, with technical factual essays and creative systems in order to create professional performance. But that requires more human presence and human marking. Arguably, generative AI will and can and will be able to assess those creative essays and e-portfolio solutions which previous multiple choice AI couldn't. But I think that's a whole, what he's talking about here is digital assessment strategies. So one, why are we doing the assessment? Two, what's our strategy? And what's our strategy in the world of generative AI? Well, here's a second sort of attached part of that City and Guilds presentation, where I think particularly useful is value wheel, where Patrick says, Similar assessment methodologies and skill sets can be used to address judgment interventions at any point in the learning cycle. The key difference in applications is often down to how you play back the outcomes to the learner or other stakeholders. The purpose and nature of the judgments will often dictate the acceptable assessment models. And being quite prescient at this point, he said, technology has an increasing role to play at all stages of assessment and learning. And my view is that generative AI can be and will be used for especially giving feedback to students and learners in the future. Now, look, with all this worry that the traditional assessment is being killed by this generative AI, which we tried to ban and we can't, I think we've got to question how good our assessment systems were. And for some time there's been a pressure for moving towards authentic assessment. And I quite like this definition by Shane Sutherland, predating GenAI again. That authentic assessment relates to what students experience in the real world instead of testing students' proficiency in completing tests. Authentic assessment methods are designed to assess knowledge and test how students apply the knowledge in real-world situations. And the purpose for application of knowledge in practice is increasingly more important than knowledge recall. So look, yes, Gen AI challenges knowledge recall, quite simply. But the way to round that is to make that assessment authentic. But I'd probably argue that in vocational education and training, which is the area of education I do most work in, we have largely authentic assessment. Why? Because it's competence-based. It's seeing what you can do, how you can apply knowledge. And in fact, it really combines knowledge and practice. And, coming back to Sean's definition, it's related to real work tasks in the real world. And it uses the tools of the job. So we assess people using tools which are used in real work tasks in the real world. And increasingly, in fact, interestingly, photographic evidence is increasingly used in that assessment. But why? Because photographs are an authentic real world artifact increasingly used in vocational education and training. But does that mean that works fine for vocational education training, but what about general education? Now look, I'd argue that generative AI has vast potential for developing new forms of assessment, new projects and project work, which can be undertaken individually, but it can also be taken collectively. But that the predominant thing here is the pedagogy which we're developing. And I very much liked this series of exercises, of projects, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours, which can be undertaken for creative work and creative forms of assessment, and especially for creative forms of assessment for learning using generative AI. And of course, in terms of demonstrating learning, showing learning, there's many different ways we can do that. But especially through development of artifacts, through interaction between people, through interaction between people and machines, and through gaining feedback, from giving feedback and gaining feedback. And once more, I think that generative AI allows us to demonstrate learning in that variety of different ways. So it's one thing we've developed a strategy by now. I hope we've worked out why we're doing this assessment, what the purpose of it is. We've got a strategy for it, but we've still got to design it, haven't we? And I like this slide very much. It's a very good presentation in, I think it was November last year, on assessment in the age of AI, which is by EduCause. Look it up on the web and you'll find it somewhere. But there's a few things I particularly like about this. First of all, sound pedagogy is the first thing. Aligning to learning outcomes, allowing multiple varied opportunities to demonstrate learning. Then secondly, I very much like the academic integrity and the definition of it. 6 values: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. We don't need to retreat, have some courage. And I love the thing which is frequently left out, the idea of wellness. Making choices to lead to optimal well-being for students and instructors. And let's face it, I don't think most of our present assessment systems are fit for purpose in terms of promoting wellness. Quite the opposite. I think generally our assessment systems promote fear and anxiety, which is another reason why we have to change things. And Bloom's taxonomy, well, here's Bloom's taxonomy revisited with a column for looking in terms of the taxonomy at AI capabilities and distinctive human skills, which means we have to think about and reason with the cognitive and affective domains, interpret and relate to authentic problems, decisions and choices. So what they're recommending is review. First of all, amend by analysing, and then review the way we're doing assessment at the moment and thinking about the difference. Think about the difference. So this is another tool which we can use to review the capabilities of AI tools and possibly change how we're doing things now with assessment. But as you see, I've been fairly positive about generative AI, in fact enthusiastic about it. But what should we be concerned about? There's a fairly long list here, isn't there? Bias, we're getting used to that. Transparency, it's not transparent. Hallucination, oh yes, the generative AI can hallucinate, which is a word they nicely made up for lying. But what really worries me, and of course it's being hyped to like nothing, but what really worries me is commercialization and access to it. First of all, that we're going to make education more unequal by those who have got access to pay, who can afford to pay 20 euros a month for GPT-4, and others will have to use slower systems. But there'll be more inequality in the world as a result of it. But also the commercialization of education, because at the moment access to generative AI means accessing the products of very large companies, Googles of the world or OpenAIs of the world. I'd like to see education initiatives to develop our own models of open source models which can be used within education, and I think that needs to come out of the education ecostructure itself, and especially the universities need to work to support that. So I'm concerned about a lot of things. We need ethical frameworks for AI. We know we need that. I'm not so worried about AI taking over the world, but I'm worried about transparency and responsibility and privacy and non-malfeasance as well. I only stumbled on this last week. It's extremely good literature review of the discussions on ethical principles in international AI in education. I recommend it highly. And I think this table is very useful of things we should be looking for around ethical practice in AI, diversity, equity, sustainability, societal well-being. And let's look at those things about the bottom: autonomy, which I think is very important, ethical design, and the issue of commercialization, which I've already talked about, and of course empowerment of teachers and teaching of learners and learning. My colleague George Beckiardis is going to do a presentation in a moment, and he's going to talk about the work we've been doing with teachers and trainers, both in the eAssessment Erasmus Plus project, but now through the AI Pioneers large-scale Erasmus project, the work we're trying to do to empower teachers and trainers to use AI and to experiment with AI and to reflect on their practice. So that's my time up. You want to find out more? Go to the AI Pioneers website, and we've got a very active blog there, and we've got the AI Pioneers network, which we'd love you all to join. This last better image of AI is of an optimistic view of human AI collaboration. Thanks for listening to me. That's it.